Excuse me, there's no way I'm sitting next to him. The outburst slices through the chatter of boarding passengers. Conversations die mid-sentence. Bags stop rolling. Every head turns toward the voice. The white man stands firm, pointing. A finger toward the black traveler already buckled into his seat. His tone drips with entitlement. Every word louder than the last. I pay good money for this ticket, he sneers. And I'm not about to spend hours crammed beside someone like that. The cabin falls into stunned silence. Eyes swing toward the man in the window seat, the target of the hatred. He sits frozen, gripping the armrest, his jaw tightening as the words pierce deeper than any blade. A whisper of judgment spreads through the rows. Some gasp in disbelief, others pretend not to notice. A child's voice asks, "Mom, why is he yelling?" But no answer comes. The black passenger stares straight ahead, refusing to flinch. His silence is not weakness, it's survival. Yet the humiliation burns. The air feels thinner. Every heartbeat pounds louder. And in that charged moment, flight is no longer about destinations or schedules. It becomes a stage where racism is on full display, daring anyone to intervene. Not a single seatback screen matters anymore. All eyes are locked on the aisle. Phones rise, recording, their red dots blinking judgment into permanence. A digital jury forms in real time. Some passengers whisper, "Did you hear what he just said?" While others smirk, relieved it's not. Them under attack. The black man feels it all. The stare of strangers. The weight of being reduced to a spectacle. He's not just a passenger anymore. He's been made into a headline, a hashtag waiting to happen. The cabin hums with tension, thick enough to choke. His chest tightens, his throat dry, but he refuses to look away. He knows if he reacts wrong, even slightly, he'll be branded the problem. And as the silence stretches on, the aggressor feeds on it, believing this plane belongs to him alone. While the victim bears the crushing silence of hundreds, the man's voice climbs, growing sharper with every word. I said I'm not sitting next to him. Move me or move him, but I'm not staying here. A murmur ripples through the cabin, the discomfort thickening. He leans closer to the attendant now approaching. You think I paid thousands just to sit by someone like him? I deserve better. His words slice through the air, each one designed to wound, to belittle. The black passenger feels every syllable crash against his dignity, yet he remains still, because one wrong move could flip the story, turning him into the villain in their eyes. The aggressor smirks, mistaking silence for weakness. This isn't right, he says louder, glancing at the watching crowd. Everyone here knows it, but not everyone does. Some lower their eyes, some nod. Some tap furiously on their phones, capturing the storm as if it were entertainment. The humiliation isn't just in the insult, it's in the applause of silence, the permission hidden in indifference. The flight attendant hovers, caught in a tightening noose of responsibility. Her eyes darted between the furious passenger and the silent man at the window. Sir, please lower your voice, she says, but it lacks conviction. Her hesitation speaks louder than her words. The black passenger studies her face, searching for a flicker of fairness, a sign that she will protect him. But what he sees is fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of choosing the wrong side. The aggressor senses it too. His grin widens, feeding on her indecision. You see, he proclaims, even she knows this isn't right. The man in the window seat sinks deeper into himself. Each second of silence isolates him further, making him wonder if anyone here would stand against injustice, or if survival means enduring it quietly. The whispers spread like wildfire. Unbelievable, one woman mutters, shaking her head. He's not wrong, though, another voice murmurs back. The divide is clear, some horrified, some complicit, most silent. The cabin becomes a mirror of society itself, a fractured spectrum of courage and cowardice. A few passengers shift uncomfortably, their guilt showing in restless movements. Yet others remain still, avoiding eye contact, afraid that speaking up would cost them comfort, or worse, their seat. The man at the window feels their silence cut deeper than the insults. Because racism doesn't survive only in words. It thrives in the quiet approval of bystanders who choose not to act. The man's hands tremble under the tray table, fists clenched tight. His chest burns with unspoken rage. He wants to shout, to call out the injustice. He wants to rise, to reclaim his dignity. But he knows the truth. Anger is a weapon that will be used against him. His heart screams, "Why me? Again?" The years of microaggressions, the subtle stares, the constant questioning of his place, all condensed into this one public humiliation. A single tear threatens, but he swallows it back. Not here. Not now. His silence becomes armor, though it feels more like chains. Around him, voices murmur, phones record, and still he sits motionless, caught between fury and survival. The aggressor leans back, smug, his voice dripping with victory. See? He won't even defend himself. The attendant shifts closer, lips parting to speak, but her hesitation betrays the choice already forming. The black passenger's mind races. Words pound in his skull, desperate for release. Rage, sorrow, exhaustion, all clashing inside. How long must I carry this weight? How many times must I swallow pride to survive? The racist smirks, savoring the silence. "Thought so," he mutters, as if the verdict has already been delivered. And just as the attendant prepares to act, eyes flicking toward the window seat, the story doesn't end here. Instead, it teeters on the edge, leaving the man's dignity hanging in the balance, moments from either shattering or rising. "Don't forget your scarf, Daddy," his daughter had said, her tiny hands holding it out with pride. He smiled, taking it gently, tucking it into his bag. That morning had been still, too still, coffee brewing, suitcase packed, shoes lined by the door. Outwardly calm, he moved with a quiet grace, but behind his steady pace lived exhaustion. Not the kind that comes from work, but from years of carrying an invisible burden. Each mirror glance reminded him, today was just another journey, another test of patience in a world that seemed determined to question his right to belong. He wasn't just a passenger. He was a man who built his life on persistence, a father, a husband, a professional who rose before sunrise and worked long after others had left. Colleagues respected his intellect. Neighbors admired his kindness. But he knew respect was something he had to earn twice over. Every achievement carried the weight of proving wrong those who doubted him. "Someday," he had told his wife, "our children won't have to fight these same battles." His voice carried both hope and fatigue. Dreams of building a future, bigger than himself, pushed him forward. Yet even determination couldn't erase the scars of being constantly measured against prejudice. At the airport, it was routine. Security lingered on his bag a little longer than others. The officer's eyes scanned his passport with suspicion that no explanation could erase. In office hallways, handshakes sometimes skipped over him. Interviews that began with polite smiles too often ended with phrases like, "We'll be in touch," but never were. Even at restaurants, service somehow arrived slower at his table. These weren't shouts or open slurs. They were small cuts, nearly invisible but relentless. They gathered like stones in his chest, heavy and unspoken. He learned to hide frustration behind a practiced smile. To the world, he appeared unshaken, but inside, each encounter etched another reminder of how racism never truly left his side. This trip wasn't about leisure. It was bigger than him. He carried documents in his briefcase that could change the future of his career, a presentation he had prepared for weeks, each page lined with careful notes. For him, this flight meant opportunity, a chance to open doors that had long remained shut. Yet beyond ambition, there was more. A promise to his family that he would keep pushing forward, that his sacrifices meant something. To fail wasn't just about him. It risked shaking the foundation of everything he worked for. All he wanted was a quiet journey, a few hours of calm between endless obligations, a window seat, headphones in, the world outside drifting by. But peace was something he rarely received unchallenged. Even in stillness, he carried the awareness that prejudice lingered like a shadow, waiting for the smallest moment to appear. Every trip held the same unspoken question. Would this be the day? When hatred reminded him yet again that his existence was seen as an intrusion. He never feared turbulence, never feared the skies. No, his dread lived on the ground, in the stares at boarding gates, the whispered assumptions, the quiet hostility that traveled with him like unwanted luggage. As he zipped his bag that morning, a thought crossed his mind, sharp, fleeting, but unforgettable. It's not the flying I fear. It's the people I meet along the way, and with that he stepped into a day that would test not just his patience, but his very dignity. "Step forward, sir." The officer's voice was flat, but his eyes lingered with suspicion that felt sharper than any words. Passengers behind shuffled impatiently, yet the focus stayed fixed on him. "Where are you traveling today?" The officer asked, though the information was already on the boarding pass in his hand. "To New York," he replied calmly, though a faint tremor betrayed the irritation beneath his measured tone. The man behind him coughed loudly, muttering, "Come on already," as though the delay were his fault. The officer's stare deepened. "And the purpose of your trip?" He inhaled slowly, answering with controlled dignity. "Business." Nothing about his answer should have raised doubt. Still, the pause before the officer finally waved him through was long enough to remind him. In this place he was not seen as a traveler, he was seen as a threat. "Sir, step aside." Random check, 2 words he'd heard too many times. His jaw tightened as he moved toward the inspection table, suitcase unzipped under prying hands. A woman in line whispered, "Why him?" Her husband replied, "You know why." The phrase burned deeper than the search itself. The agent rifled through his shirts, laptop, and personal documents as though hunting for evidence of guilt. Socks spilled, papers unfolded, everything laid bare before strangers who looked on with thinly veiled annoyance. "Is this really necessary?" he asked quietly. "Standard procedure," the officer said without looking up. He stood there exposed, stripped of privacy, stripped of respect, forced to prove, again, that his existence carried no danger. When finally waved away, he gathered his belongings with steady hands. But inside, the humiliation weighed heavier than the suitcase he carried. The boarding line inched forward, chatter filling the air. That's when he heard it. A man behind him leaned close to his companion, muttering, just loud enough, "People like him don't belong in first class." The word slid under his skin like a knife. He clenched his jaw, staring straight ahead. He could confront it, but what then? A scene before even stepping onto the plane? His silence wasn't weakness. It was survival. Yet survival didn't dull. The sting. He thought of his daughter's voice that morning, her innocence untouched by hatred. Would she one day hear those same words aimed at her? The whisper wasn't just an insult. It was a reminder that no matter how hard he worked, there would always be someone determined to reduce him to less than human. The flight attendants greeted each passenger warmly. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Thompson. Hope you enjoy your flight." "Good evening, ma'am. Right this way." Bright smiles, cheerful tones, until it was his turn. The attendant's grin faded into neutrality, her voice flat. Boarding pass. She barely glanced at him before motioning silently toward the cabin. Behind him, laughter resumed as another passenger received the warmth he was denied. It was small, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. It wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't. That absence of recognition screamed louder than any insult. He walked down the aisle with his head high, but the quiet rejection trailed him, echoing louder than the footsteps of those who followed. Each slight seemed insignificant on its own. A glare here, a dismissive tone there, the subtle shifting of bodies that left extra space around him as if his presence carried contagion. But together, they built a mountain on his chest. It wasn't one insult that crushed him. It was the accumulation of all of them. The glares at security, the forced search, the whisper, the cold silence at boarding, they layered like bricks, walling him in until breathing itself felt heavier. He wanted to shake it off, to remind himself why he was here. But every interaction told him the same story, no matter how composed, how professional, how human he was. The world insisted on reminding him that to them, he would never be enough. He straightened his shoulders, inhaled deeply, and reminded himself of the promise he'd made to his family. They will not break. Me, he whispered under his breath. A vow meant as much for himself as anyone else. Hope wasn't naive, it was survival. He refused to hand hatred the satisfaction of seeing him defeated. With steady steps, he prepared to endure whatever waited next. A quiet sigh escaped as he entered the cabin, placing his bag overhead. The line behind him shuffled, forward, voices rising and falling in ordinary rhythm. But within that ordinary rhythm, something darker brewed. The man who had whispered in line wasn't finished, and his hostility was about to ignite. "Get him out of my seat!" The shout shattered the cabin's uneasy silence. The antagonist rose halfway, finger jabbing toward the protagonist like an accusation. "This is America! I have rights!" he barked, his voice swelling with entitlement. "I paid for comfort, not to sit next to someone who doesn't belong here." Passengers shifted uncomfortably, whispers rippling through the rows. Some avoided eye contact, others leaned closer, hungry for the confrontation to unfold. The protagonist stayed still, gripping the armrest, fighting to keep his expression calm. His voice carried low but steady. "I have the same ticket you do, the same rights." But the antagonist only grew louder, each word dripping with venom. "No. People like you take what you don't deserve, and I won't stand for it." The statement wasn't just about a seat. It was a declaration meant to strip dignity, to reduce him to less than equal. At that moment, it wasn't about boarding passes or assigned rows. It was about racism, hiding behind the mask of entitlement, and the crowd watching it unfold like a show. A flight attendant hurried over, her voice soft, but her eyes darting nervously between the men. "Let's keep this calm," she urged, crouching slightly beside the protagonist. Then came the words that landed like a knife. "Sir, maybe you could move, just to avoid conflict." For a moment he thought he misheard. Move? Him? The one being harassed? He leaned in, voice tight. "You're asking me to give up my seat because he can't control his prejudice?" Her silence was the answer. The betrayal was sharp, cutting deeper than the man's insults. She wasn't neutral. She was siding with injustice under the guise of keeping the peace. The antagonist smirked, satisfied. "See, even she agrees. You don't belong here." The protagonist's chest burned with a mix of anger and despair. He wasn't being protected. He was being pushed out. It was one thing to endure hatred from a stranger, but another to see authority quietly bend in its direction. That silence screamed louder than any slur, leaving him with the crushing truth. In this space, his dignity was negotiable. The glow of phone screens lit up like stars in the dim cabin. Passengers angled their cameras, eager to capture the unfolding drama. Some whispered judgments under their breath. He should just move. Others shook their heads, murmuring, "This isn't right," yet kept their voices low, hidden behind the safety of silence. The protagonist felt every lens pressed against him, documenting his humiliation. He wasn't a man anymore. He was content for strangers, a viral clip waiting to be uploaded. The antagonist played to the crowd, voice booming, "This is what happens when people forget their place," and no one stopped him. The bystander effect was in full display. Dozens of eyes, dozens of hands holding evidence, but not one body stepping forward to halt the injustice. Judgment flew freely in whispers, but action remained locked behind pursed lips. With every passing second, the isolation deepened. The protagonist looked around, searching for a lifeline. Dozens of faces, none willing to meet his gaze. Each a silent witness, each an unspoken verdict. You're alone. It wasn't just the antagonist who humiliated him, it was the indifference of the crowd, the quiet compliance of the attendant, the refusal of anyone to simply say, "Enough." His chest tightened, a suffocating pressure spreading across his ribs. The cabin felt smaller, the air heavier. He wasn't just under attack, he was abandoned. The humiliation wasn't private, it was collective. Every second of silence told him his presence was unwelcome, his humanity negotiable. He clenched his fists under the tray table, fighting the urge to break, whispering to himself, "Hold it together. Don't give them the satisfaction." But holding on felt like drowning. Then, from the back, a single voice cut through the tension. "Sit down!" a man shouted at the antagonist. "You're the one causing trouble, not him!" For a fleeting moment, relief sparked. Finally, someone had spoken, but the cabin swallowed the words, burying them under murmurs and shifting feet. No one else echoed the defense. No one reinforced it. The antagonist turned with a sneer. "Mind your business." The lone voice went quiet, retreating back into anonymity. The protagonist felt the hope flicker, then dim. One voice couldn't withstand the roar of silence. The hostility still pointed at him, unshaken. He remained the target, still cornered, still framed as the problem. The attendant's expression hardened. "Sir, please cooperate," she said firmly, directed not at the aggressor, but at him. Cooperate. The word stung. The racist shouted, yet he was the one painted as difficult. The victim, reframed as the disruptor. "Why am I being asked to move?" His voice cracked slightly, desperation bleeding through. "He's the one shouting!" But the attendant avoided his eyes, addressing the crowd instead. "We need to keep everyone comfortable." Comfort. For everyone but him. In that moment, it was clear. The system didn't care who was right. It cared who was easiest to sacrifice. And once again, it was him. The injustice pressed heavier than the seatbelt across his waist, pressing down until it nearly broke his will. At last, the weight became unbearable. With trembling hands, he unbuckled the strap and rose slowly. A hush swept through the cabin as hundreds of eyes followed him, each stare branding his back. Every step toward the empty row felt like walking barefoot across glass. Dignity fractured with each shuffle, yet pride demanded he hold his head high. Even as shame burned through him, the whispers cut deeper than blades. Finally. About time? Should have moved earlier. He didn't look back. Couldn't. The burden of those gazes was too heavy. He wasn't walking to another seat. He was walking through humiliation itself, each step a reminder of how quickly justice could crumble when silence outweighed courage. As he slid into the new seat, the antagonist reclined comfortably, smirk curling across his face like a crown of victory. "See? That's how it should be," he muttered proudly, folding his arms as if he had restored order to the world. Passengers exhaled, tension easing as though injustice was a problem solved by submission. But the arrogance in that smirk was more dangerous than the shouting. It was the belief that hatred had triumphed, that silence was approval. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that his so-called victory had just planted the seed of reckoning. A murmur rippled through the cramped cabin. At first it was one voice, sharp with recognition. "Wait! Isn't that Michael Jordan?" Heads turned instantly, necks craning, eyes widening as realization spread like a spark catching dry grass. The man forced from his seat, the one humiliated, wasn't just another passenger. He was the legend, the icon, the face known around the world. A whisper escaped a teenager clutching his phone. "That is him." "It's Michael Jordan!" Gasps fluttered through the aisles. The weight of what had just happened struck people like a punch to the chest. The greatest basketball player alive had been shoved aside, degraded as if he were invisible. The racists, booming words now hung in the air, poisonous and undeniable. He hadn't attacked a nameless stranger. He had disrespected a man millions looked up to, a man whose very name symbolized greatness. For the first time since the confrontation began, shame didn't rest on Jordan. It shifted, slowly, back to the one who had spewed the hate. And yet Jordan himself sat still, shoulders squared, as though daring the silence to say more than words ever could. Phones rose higher, trembling hands desperate to capture the moment. Social media in real time, hashtags already forming before the plane even touched down. Oh my God, that's him. Michael Jordan just got disrespected like that? This is unreal. The disbelief wasn't quiet anymore. It swelled, igniting through rows, each murmur adding fuel to the fire. The racist had wanted attention. Now he had it. But not the kind he imagined. Every lens pointed toward him, not as a man standing his ground, but as a living example of racism caught in the act. The atmosphere thickened with shock and outrage. Whispers weren't enough now. People wanted answers. They wanted accountability. And with every recording, the aggressor's cruelty became harder to erase, harder to twist into anything but what it was: discrimination laid bare for the world to see. The antagonist leaned back at first, smug, convinced he had won, but when the name finally pierced his arrogance, his smirk faltered. "Michael." "Jordan," he muttered, blinking as though he'd misheard. Passengers' eyes locked on him, their judgment no longer hidden. The air that once fed his bravado now suffocated him. His lips trembled, searching for something to cling to, some justification. The certainty drained from his posture, replaced by unease. He had expected applause for asserting dominance. Instead, he found himself shrinking beneath the very gazes he thought he commanded. The realization carved across his face. He hadn't just bullied a man, he had publicly humiliated one of the most respected figures alive. The smirk that once symbolized victory now collapsed into fear, and Michael Jordan, still silent, held more power in his calm than the racist had ever managed in his rage. The flight attendant, who once urged compliance, felt the cabin's eyes shift toward her. Their stares were knives, cutting through the thin shield of authority she'd hidden behind. Her cheeks flushed pale as the truth settled in. She had sided with the aggressor. She had told Michael Jordan, the Michael Jordan, to move, to keep peace. Passengers glared, their disgust heavy, their silence screaming louder than words. She couldn't hide behind protocol anymore. She wasn't a neutral worker in uniform. She was complicit. Every ounce of professionalism collapsed beneath the weight of her guilt. She tried to look away, but shame glued her in place, forcing her to stand as evidence of her own betrayal. Jordan didn't lash out. He didn't raise his voice, didn't hurl insults back. He simply sat with an air of composure that made the silence thunder. His stillness wasn't weakness. It was power. Eyes that once looked at him with pity now saw something greater, A man who refused to be dragged down by hate, who let dignity speak louder than anger ever could. His posture told a story. Shoulders squared, gaze fixed forward, lips sealed tight. He was wounded, yes. Humiliated, yes. But broken? Never. Children stared in awe, whispering to their parents. Even those who stayed silent earlier now shifted uncomfortably, realizing their passivity had fed the injustice. Without a single word, Jordan had turned humiliation into resistance. His silence carried a message impossible to ignore. Racism could bruise him, but it could not define him, and in that quiet defiance, he reclaimed what the aggressor tried to strip away. The aggressor's voice cracked. I didn't know, he stammered, words tumbling out like loose stones. I thought... Look, it wasn't about race, it was the seat. That's all. Nobody believed him. He glanced around desperately, searching for an ally, but every face was stone. Every eye locked on his disgrace. His excuses only twisted the knife deeper. I didn't mean... He should have said something, he sputtered, but the damage was irreversible. The cameras had captured every word, every sneer, every ounce of venom. No apology could erase the humiliation he'd inflicted. His desperation only amplified his guilt, painting him not as misunderstood, but as exposed, a coward scrambling under the light of truth. The tide turned. Moments ago, Michael Jordan had sat isolated, abandoned in humiliation. Now, the cabin pulsed with unity, not against him, but against the one who had sought to demean him. The racist shrank further into his seat, drowning beneath the same eyes that once ignored Jordan's pain. For the first time, the balance of ice power shifted. Justice, though delayed, began to stir in the voices, the glares, the collective will of the crowd. And while the flight wasn't over, one truth had already taken root. The aggressor's downfall had only just begun. Enough. The captain's voice thundered through the cabin, cutting through the tension like a blade. His presence carried authority, his eyes locked on the aggressor. This behavior will not be tolerated. Harassment, non-compliance, and blatant racism have no place here. You're being removed from this flight, immediately. Passengers sat frozen, but relief washed through the silence. The command wasn't just protocol, it was justice delivered with undeniable weight. 2 crew members flanked, the racist forcing him down the aisle. His once loud voice was gone, replaced by muttered protests no one cared to hear. Phones recorded from every angle. Applause erupted, claps striking harder than any insult. For all his arrogance, he now shuffled forward, stripped of pride, drowning beneath the very spotlight he had demanded. Michael Jordan rose without a word, his movements measured, his presence steady. As he reclaimed his seat, the atmosphere shifted again, not in chaos, but in calm. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk. His strength was rooted in restraint, a living reminder that real power isn't about shouting louder, but about standing taller without needing to speak. The energy in the cabin lifted. Passengers exchanged nods, some whispering his name with respect, others wiping quiet tears. Jordan's relief wasn't born from fame. It came from seeing truth prevail over prejudice, even if only for a moment. For the first time since takeoff, justice had found its voice. By the time wheels touched the ground, the incident was already everywhere. Videos spread, headlines blared. Michael Jordan faces racism mid-flight. Crowd responds. Millions watched, outraged yet inspired. The message was clear. Discrimination lingers, even against legends. But so does resistance. And as the world reacted, one truth echoed louder than applause. Racism must always be confronted. So let me ask you, if you had been there, sitting just a few rows away, what would you have done? Would you have spoken out against the racism unfolding before your eyes, or stayed silent like so many did? Drop your thoughts in the comments, tell us how you feel, share your own experiences with injustice, and let's create a space where real conversations about discrimination can finally take root. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be heard, and together we can raise awareness and fight racism everywhere.